Hey, I'm Jake. I make videos about Pathfinder 2 and a few other things, but mostly Pathfinder 2. Thank you for joining me again for more Howl of the Wild. Witches of the Wild! Okay. While many look beyond the natural world for solutions to their problems, they miss the beings of great and terrible power that live all around them. Any of these entities, whether flying through the skies or hiding within mortals' bodies, hold secrets that underpin the natural world. I am so happy there's new patrons! Urgh! Devourer of Decay. Your patron appeared at the end or near the end of a life, flickering in feverish visions or glinting mysteriously in the eyes of waiting scavengers. Although horrifying to many, decay creates the resources needed for new life. This fate awaits you, and possibly even your patron, whether they're a towering arboreal, a subterranean fungus creature, or one of the psychopomps that shepherds the entire process along. Spell list, primal, patron skill, nature, primal, nature. Lesson of the hungry scavenger. Your patron teaches ways to convert death into new life. You gain the Scrounger's Glee Hex cantrip, and your familiar learns Enfeeble. Before we read the other thing that your familiar gets, let's read Scrounger's Glee. Hex cantrip, 1 action, auditory cantrip, concentrate, fear, hex, mental. Patron Devourer of Decay, range 30 feet, targets 1 creature, defense, will, duration sustained up to 1 minute, so it's a hex. Right, that's how they work. With a cruel laugh and a flash of your canines, you make a target understand that death is coming to claim it and that its demise will serve to strengthen another. The target becomes frightened 1 if it fails a will save, or frightened 2 on a critical failure. This condition can't be reduced below 1 while the spell is active and the target can hear you. That's neat. You can dismiss the spell as a reaction when an ally critically succeeds at a strike against the target, restoring 1d4 hit points to that ally, and the heightened effect is an additional 1d4 hit points for every 2 spell ranks. So, that's neat. Like, the critical hit, if it is... Okay, so the frightened condition makes it easier for people to critically hit them. And then once your ally critically hits them, hopefully killing them, they gain hit points. This perfectly fits the theme and concept of decay, and it's also useful mechanically. How many, like, offensive witches heal people as a side effect of their offensive power? This is good. I like this. This is creative. All right, so now let's go back to Familiar of Parasitic Might. Your familiar appears gaunt and malnourished or otherwise on the brink of death, even though it's quite healthy. When you cast or sustain a hex, your familiar can draw on the waning strength of another to sustain itself. 1 creature within 15 feet of your familiar with less than half of its maximum hit points becomes sickened 1, unless it succeeds at a fortitude saving throw against your spell DC. That's cool, because sickened sucks. Sickened horribly sucks. I hate sickened. That's why it's so much fun to inflict it on PCs. Sorry, not sorry. Next patron, Ripple in the Deep. When your patron appeared, it was as an unfathomably large shadow beneath the waves, possibly as an ancient denizen of the vast waters like a kraken or Cthulhu. Whether channeling the lethal terror of an oceanic predator or singing the ancestral wisdom of its gentle giants, your Leviathan patron brings you lessons from the unplumbed depths of the world. Spell list, primal, patron skill. Anybody? Nature. Lesson of surface and seas. Your patron teaches of the dangers and wonders of its domain, even at the very edges of the water. You gain the Sting of the Sea Hex cantrip, and your familiar learns Dizzying Colors or Grease. I love that it gives you an option. So few patrons give you options of the spell that you gain. I love it. It's a great idea. Now let's read what Sting of the Sea does. It's a hex cantrip. 1 action. Concentrate. Hex. Patron Ripple in the Deep. Range 30 feet. Targets 1 creature. Defense fortitude. Duration sustained up to 1 minute. A long tentacle like that belonging to an octopus, anemone, or man of war, dripping with briny water, appears from a glowing blue portal to wrap around the target's face, blocking its vision. That's creepy as hell. For the duration of the spell, the target must attempt a fortitude save at the beginning of its turn. The portal follows the target around, and the tentacle can't be targeted or harmed. That's kind of messed up, like just psychologically speaking. I imagine that person being very freaked out. Critical success. The target is unaffected. Success. The target takes a -2 penalty to perception checks involving vision until the end of its turn. That makes sense. Failure. The target is dazed until the end of its turn. Critical failure. The target is blinded until the end of its turn. Oh, that's a nice debuff. That's a nice debuffing cantrip. And it's disturbing. And that's always a winner for me. Here's what your familiar gets. Familiar of overwhelming tides. Your familiar constantly drips with ocean water. Ew, it's moist. When you cast or sustain a hex, you can cause a small wave to surge forth from your familiar. One creature within 10 feet of your familiar is pushed 5 feet away from your familiar. That's awesome because there's no roll. They're just pushed away. One creature. Okay, so it could be an ally to get them a little bit closer to a goal, or an enemy to get them a little farther away from the familiar, or from you. That's awesome. I hope they don't errata that to make it a saving throw. I know that might be more balanced, but I don't fucking care. That's cool. Before I go to the next page, just look at how happy that little knoll is with their patron of decay. Yeah, I'm gonna eat that. Screw steak by itself. I want some mushrooms on the side. I'm too happy about this. Next patron, Whisper of Wings. Wings and swirling winds announced the approach of your patron. The wings might have been radiantly feathered, jeweled like a dragon's fly, strangely mechanical, or leathery with the scent of sulfur. But the controlled chaos of their movements contained countless teachings. Spell list primal, patron scale nature. Lesson of the observed sky. Your patron teaches that the sky can guide you anywhere you let it. You gain the murmuration hex cantrip, and your familiar learns gentle landing. That makes sense for a familiar, but I mean, that's not always going to be great. I wish that there were a way to change that or upgrade that, or if I'm the GM, it's not going to have to always be gentle landing, because eventually that's just crap. Eventually. At first level, it's really handy, because dying's bad. Murmuration. Let's read this. Murmuration, hex cantrip, 1 action, sonic, concentrate. It's a hex cantrip. Patron, Whisper of Wings, range 30 feet, targets 1 creature, defense will, duration sustained up to 1 minute. The target feels the brush of feathers against its skin and hears screeches in its ears, warning it to keep away from a creature you designate that's within 30 feet of you when you cast the spell, which can include yourself. Once per round, if the target moves closer to the designated creature, it must attempt a will save or take 1d4 piercing or sonic damage. Let me read you the success failure options. Critical success, they're unaffected, obviously. Success, the target takes half damage. Failure, the target takes full damage. Critical failure, the target takes 1d4 sonic and 1d4 piercing damage, and if it attempts an attack roll or hostile skill check this round, it takes a -2 status penalty to the roll. That is great. I love giving penalties to enemies as a side effect. It's nice. Heightened, for each spell rank, the damage increases by 1d4 on a success or 2d4 on a critical success, 1d4 of which is sonic and 1d4 of which is piercing. That could be very damaging. And it's got a penalty. This is a really good hex cantrip. It's a hex cantrip. You just keep doing this stuff. This is great. This is good. Do this. It's good. It's an option. It's good. Your familiar gets Familiar of Nimble Flight. Even if your familiar doesn't have wings, it can sometimes move as if carried aloft by the wind. When you cast or sustain a hex, your familiar can fly up to 15 feet. This movement doesn't trigger reactions. That's nice if you want your familiar to get into a position, like if you have a utility familiar, like they're going to hand out potions, or they're going to grapple somebody, or they're going to tie somebody up, or they're going to try to trip somebody, or whatever. There are a lot of different things you can do with a familiar. I have a familiar video. If you don't know what all it can do on its own, check out the familiar video. There's two familiar videos. Watch them both. I don't know. One of them is about how to buff the familiar with like spells and potions and stuff, and the other one is about how generally it's useful. I'm talking about how generally it's useful, not the spells and potions thing. Which lessons? Greater lessons. You can select from these lessons when you choose a greater lesson. Lesson of decay. All living things eventually die, feeding fungus and insects. You gain the mycological malady hex, and your familiar learns insect form. Let's read mycological malady. It's a focus 3 2-action hex. It has the traits concentrate, disease, focus hex, manipulate witch. Lesson decay, range touch, targets 1 creature, defense fortitude, duration sustained up to a minute. I'm not a fan that it's touch, but we'll see what happens. You infect your target with fungal spores to hasten the cycle of decay. The target must attempt a fortitude saving throw. Undead that aren't incorporeal, such as skeletons and zombies, don't have their normal immunity to this disease, as the spores can still colonize their remaining flesh and bone. Yes, that's neat. This might also apply to other non-living creatures made of organic material at the GM's discretion. Okay. Yeah, mummies. Critical success, the target's unaffected. Success, the target sprouts mushrooms and is enfeebled 2 for 1 round. Failure, the target is afflicted with void cap spores at stage 1, which I'll read in just a moment. Critical failure, they start at stage 2 with void cap spores. Void cap spores disease. This disease ends when the spell ends. Stage 1, enfeebled 2. Oh. Okay, well, that's good. That's for 1 round. Stage 2, enfeebled 2 and slowed 1 for 1 round. Oh, that's good. Stage 3, enfeebled 2, slowed 1, and stupefied 2. This is good. This is really good. Oh, I want to make a decay witch druid familiar master. Okay, mycological melody is cool. That's a good greater lesson. That's a great greater lesson. Next greater lesson, lesson of the flock. Power flows when many work as one. You gain the Sheltering Wings hex, and your familiar learns Levitate. Okay, well, Levitate is useful, but what's Sheltering Wings? Let's go look at that now. It's a level 3 focus spell, Hex, Manipulate, Witch. Lesson, Flock, Trigger. An ally moves through a square within 15 feet of you or uses an action that has the move trait, range 15 feet, targets 1 ally. Like migratory birds, sorry, it's a reaction. Like migratory birds, you know everyone flies farther together. You cause immense wings to sprout from your familiar. Your familiar flies up to 30 feet, though it must move toward the triggering ally. If your familiar ends this movement adjacent to the triggering ally, it lands on their back. Until the beginning of your next turn, the familiar automatically is carried by the ally and its wings provide them cover. When the spell ends, the familiar hops off your ally into an adjacent square. This is great! This is so good! And the lessons can be learned by anyone. So if you're taking the divine tradition patron, this works perfectly with that, because then you're also giving temporary hit points while your familiar is riding on their back. Oh, this is so neat. Extra points if you make your familiar really disturbing to the person that it's riding on. However that needs to happen. You know, roleplay, mucus, whatever. Just go wild. Last greater lesson. Lesson of the Shark. Learn the ways of this deadly oceanic predator. You gain the Blood of the Water hex, and your familiar learns Feet to Fins. Why is there not yet a Fins to Feet? Huh? Why? Why is there not? Whatever. What is Blood in the Water? Level 3 focus spell, concentrate, focus hex, manipulate, spirit, witch, lesson, shark. Requirements, the target is taking persistent bleed damage or your last action dealt slashing damage to the target. Range, 30 feet, targets 1 creature that can bleed. Defense, basic reflex, duration sustained up to 1 minute. Reflex, that's weird. Predators are drawn to the scent of blood, and blood can disperse shockingly far in the water. You summon the spirits of aquatic predators to appear as a spectral swarm around the target. When you cast or sustain this spell, the target takes 2d6 spirit damage. Basic reflex save. If the target takes any damage from the spell, it treats all water as difficult terrain for 1 round as the predators try to drag them down. The spectral predators don't take up space, grant flanking, or have any other attributes a creature would. Fine, great. If you deal slashing damage to the target while the spell is active, you automatically sustain this spell. I'm going to read that again because I got nuts for a moment. If you deal slashing damage to the target while the spell is active, you automatically sustain this spell. Fuck yes. If you cast Blood in the Water while a previous casting of this hex is still in effect, the previous effect ends. This is amazing. Heightened +2 ranks, damage dealt increases by 2d6. Why not just +1 for 1d6? That's a little silly. Anyway, that's amazing. That's really, 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 really good. Oh man, that is amazing for any witch that does slashing damage. So that could be claws, that could be at range with a spell or a ranged weapon that does slashing damage. That's great. That's really cool. Oh, this makes me so happy. Now we continue with witch feats. Scatter Swarm, 1 action, level 2 feat, frequency once per round. Your patron reaches through your familiar to magically disperse a group of smaller threats. A swarm that shares a space with your familiar takes damage equal to the swarm's weakness to area damage. You choose whether this is acid, cold, electricity, or fire damage, and this action gains the trait of the damage type you choose. This is great, because it's one action. Yeah, it only affects swarms, but sometimes swarms can be terrifying. They can deal a ton of damage, and not everybody has area effect or splash abilities. They just don't. And sometimes those abilities come in the form of a consumable, like an alchemist fire. There's no save for this, so you just spend an action, the swarm takes damage. Awesome. This is very useful in certain circumstances. It's not always useful, but it's really neat. Like, I would probably try really hard to get this and another second level feat. I know it might be cheesy to do, but, you know, bribe my GM, be a human, whatever. I know, first level feat, still. Next feat, level 4, Portents of the Haruspex. It's a reaction. Concentrate prediction. Trigger, a creature within 30 feet is reduced to 0 hit points in a way that doesn't destroy their body. Although the divinations of a Haruspex traditionally require organs and lengthy interpretation, you've learned how to glimpse the future in a more simple fashion by reading creatures' wounds. Ew. The glimpse of the future gives guidance on what tools are best to use next. Roll 1d12 to determine the damage type favored by your prediction. The next time before the end of your next turn that you or your allies deals that damage type to an enemy, that enemy has weakness equal to your level against that damage. Oh, that's neat. Interesting. So a creature within 30 feet is reduced to 0 hit points. That could be an ally or an enemy. And then it gives you and your allies a bonus against the next enemy you hit. So it's very general, and so it's very flexible. That is neat. That's a really cool way of role-playing prophecy in combat. His viscera spells acid. Throw acid at him! That's awesome. Next feat, Wild Witch's Armaments. Level 6, Prerequisites, Witch's Armaments. Your patron's power continues to enhance your natural offensive capabilities. You gain additional effects for any of the unarmed strikes you chose from Witch's Armaments. If you took that feat multiple times to gain multiple attacks, you gain the appropriate additional effects. So, Eldritch Nails, if you took that previously, taking this means your nails can tear and rend with the force of a beast. If you hit the same enemy with 2 consecutive nails strikes, that enemy takes additional slashing damage equal to half your level on the second strike. So 3 if you hit twice. Meh. That's really not worth it. Like, increase your strength. Get hand wraps of mighty blows that do extra damage. That's not that impressive. Iron Teeth. Like a true predator, your teeth can crunch bone. A creature that you critically hit with a Jaws strike must succeed at a fortitude save against your class DC or become sickened 1. That's really good, because sickened sucks, as previously mentioned. Living Hair. Part of your hair hardens into sharp quills that you can eject with force. You gain a quill's ranged unarmed strike that deals 1d4 piercing damage with a range of 15 feet. Your quills are in the dark group. That's awesome. I'm just picturing a headbanging witch. Oh, that's a really flavorful, fun ability. It's also useful. Sure, it's useful. But this is cool. It's really neat. Okay, I know the Eldritch Nails extra damage is probably on par for balance, but it's unimpressive. It's boring, too. It's just, if you do this really well, which you don't always because you're a witch, so you don't have awesome bonuses to hit, and you get 2 hits in a row, you deal a little bit of extra damage. Versus you shoot quills out or you make somebody sickened. I guess the Iron Teeth is actually the best, most effective. That's all. I want more witch stuff. I know, I'm a greedy witch lover. I love the witches. I'm so glad they revisited witches. Oh man. Oh, this is so good. Ah, the decay effects and the shark one, those were really cool. Let me know if you have plans for witchy stuff, and I will let you know, because that's what I love a lot. Witches, like, obviously, look behind me. I appreciate you being here, tuning in to hear more about Howl of the Wild. I'll be continuing the series with more Howl of the Wild books until I'm out of Howl of the Wild ideas, and then I'm going back to builds and other archetypes that I already have recorded. I just haven't released them, like the Weapon Improviser and the Commander. They're just not released. I know Commander isn't an archetype, it's a class, but you know, same thing. Not. I just want to pause for a moment to say thank you to my patrons. Yeah, like, you give me money to help me out and make this channel better quality and stuff and get better cat treats, but I appreciate the encouragement. That's a big deal. Like, if somebody's willing to sacrifice to say, hey, you don't suck, that means a lot. Anyway, thanks. If you guys want to be patrons, look below. There's a link for Patron, and there's also a link to buy the Howl of the Wild, because it's cool. If you want to check out the rest of the videos that are in the series of the Howl of the Wild, the playlist is here. If you want to see the most recent live plays that we've been doing, it's here. It's sort of like Outlaws of Alkenstar meets insane time travel. It's fun. It's what you do. You have fun. You do weird shit.